Welcome, everyone. Today, I want to start a series on two of the most prolific emotions for human beings, anxiety and depression. From a Buddhist context, we can think of these emotionalities as distortions or obscurations of the mind. In other words, a mind that is pure, tamed, developed is a mind that is contented, happy, well, at peace. So, right from the onset, I think it's helpful to think of these emotions as, they're naturally occurring. They occur for all human beings. They arise and fall on their own, and they will continue to all the way up until nibbana, final full awakening. So they're naturally occurring, but they're not natural. They're not innate to you. They're not who you really are. They are considered to be distortions, abstractions. In fact, any form of dukkha or suffering, falls into that category of not, it's not really who you are. The Buddha might refer to them as an impurity, a hindrance, and so forth. And I like to think of Dhamma or Dharma as a set of tools. And with regards to anxiety and depression, there's kind of two main ways that I like to think about dealing with them. One of which is opening the heart towards them, welcoming them in, allowing oneself to fully feel, opening towards them, right? So that's number one. Number two is what seems to be the exact opposite, which is trying to sidestep it or destroy. Um, Sort of like facing anxiety and depression on a battlefield. How do I end this? Knowing that it's negative, that it leads to suffering, that it is painful. How do I put this down? Right? One thing that I think is quite interesting is these two strategies are not, in a way, they seem like opposites, but I actually think they're contained within each other. Um, so how is fighting it contained within opening towards it? Well, our typical reaction to anxiety and depression is we run from that feeling. We run from the feeling into thinking, into strategizing. Why do I feel this way? Oh no, it's coming back. What does that say about who I am? How do I get rid of it? How do I get rid of it? How long will it be here? How will it feel tomorrow? When will this end, right? So we run from the feeling into the thinking. That's our typical response. So from that typical response, opening towards it is like facing it in battle, you know? It's like in a dream when you're running away from something that's chasing you. I don't know if you've ever experienced this in a dream, but what often happens is the faster you run, the faster it chases you. Running from it never really stops it from pursuing you. So from that perspective, opening towards it is kind of like facing it in a battlefield, right? So in that way, um, the two are not as different as it might seem, and also from the perspective of a soldier facing something, facing these emotions, opening towards it, welcoming the emotion, dialing down the aversion could be one of those um, strategies, one of the tactics that the soldier might use. So anyway, I think it's really interesting how these two sort of different approaches are not so different. And I find that different Dharma teachers will typically favor one or the other. You have some teachers who will really talk about mindfulness, presence, opening the heart, not fighting anymore. welcoming, dialing down the aversion, dialing down the clinging as a main strategy. And you'll find other Dharma teachers who will really emphasize, no, this is something you need to fight. You don't allow this. This is considered negative. It is unskillful. So we're not just witnessing it, we're actively trying to put it down. And personally, I think both approaches are actually not as different as they seem at first glance, and both are valid potential strategies. So, as a practitioner, our job is to experiment, to try different things, not just what sounds good theoretically, but we actually try it out in life, in practice, and we see what is available, what feels right. And if you do this, what you'll notice is that at different times, different tools are effective or not effective. Okay. So there's so much to say about this subject. Something that's been, and I think when I give talks, there's typically something that's been swimming around in my mind, or, kind of like a snowball coming down a hill, starting to pick up momentum and and growing. And so there's something that I want to say, something I want to express. So today, the main thing I want to talk about is when perceptions arise in the mind, honing in on where they come from and where they are leading towards. So when perceptions, feelings, moods, thoughts arise in the mind, really observing and contemplating what gave rise to this, where did it come from, and also where is this heading to? If I follow this, where will it lead? So take a moment as you're listening to spread your awareness throughout your whole body. The body is a natural home, a natural resting place for the awareness. So really feel your presence, spread it throughout the entire physical field. Come back home to the way it is here and now. So before I continue, I want to just express gratitude towards Thanisaru Bhikkhu, also known as Ajahn Jeff, a wonderful Theravada Buddhist monk from the Thai forest tradition. So he was taught by Ajahn Fuang, who was taught by Ajahn Lee, who was a student of Ajahn Mun's. And reason being, I've been listening to a lot of his talks, which are on YouTube, which I really recommend, and I just want to uh, say that his teachings, his voice is part of the reason why these comments are coming from me. So anyway, when a perception of feeling arises in the mind, so let's say it's anxiety, right, or a thought that a thought or a voice, a statement in the mind that has anxiety as its undertone. Maybe we're thinking about something that is coming up in the future and we're feeling anxious about it. And there's this idea of, oh, how is this going to be for me? If we really look at where it's coming from, it can bring so much insight, so much clarity. It's interesting. Sometimes the thought gives rise to the anxiety, but other times actually anxiety arises on its own. The feeling quality, the energetic resonance of anxiousness or worry, whatever it is, actually arises first, and then lightning fast we think a thought. So it can happen both ways, but when we if you train yourself to be able to identify these energetic resonances or birthing places for thoughts, you can say, okay, this thing that's arising in me, it sounds like my own voice. It just sounds like a very valid way of thinking. It sounds like just the way I think sounds. I've had it a million times before. It's just me, right? It can seem like that, but when we look closer, we might find that no, this is just something that was preceded by one of the five hindrances. And perhaps I should talk about the five hindrances here briefly. So the five hindrances are five mental phenomena that I like to think of them as sort of like energies that arise for all human beings. The first is desire or a sense of lacking, like I need something that I don't have. It's wanting something to come towards me, trying to pull something towards me. The second hindrance is the opposite of desire. It's aversion. It's trying to push something away. It's I don't like this. Anger, frustration, hatred, boredom, criticizing, judgment, all these are forms of aversion. Okay. So those are the first two, desire and aversion. The third and fourth hindrances are also like a pair. So the third hindrance is stagnation and lethargy. It's when the energy is dialed too low. The fourth hindrance is restlessness. It's that energy is too high. It's overthinking, worrying, um, that kind of nervous, almost excited vibration. And then the fifth hindrance is doubt, self doubt, doubt in the teachings. It's that speculation, that uncertainty. I put anxiety as there with the fifth hindrance, but it's also very related to the fourth hindrance of worry and restlessness. So doubt, paralysis, not knowing which way to go, being directionless. So that's doubt. So by the way, anxiety, some people call it the fifth hindrance, some people call it the fourth. You can kind of see it there. And then depression has the tone of the third hindrance, this heaviness. When people are really depressed, you hear about people who can't get up out of bed. They're kind of just glued to their bed or couch or whatever, wherever. It's almost like the heart, the chitta is being flattened by something. Right. So anyway, these are the five hindrances. These are very prolific, dominant forces in our hearts. They move us. They move the world. They cause countries to go to war, and they cause famine. And these are very destructive, prolific, fundamental, basic forces in the world. And they all start in the mind for each individual. So when we think about where does a perception come from? If you practice with this teaching on the five hindrances, you can become skilled at identifying when a hindrance is present. And really, they're almost always present for most of us. The Buddha taught that as the five hindrances subside, jhana arises, the first jhana. So this kind of territory of experience that is characterized by bliss, joyfulness, energy, well-being. So we feel really well when the five hindrances are not around. If we're not feeling really well, if we're not thriving in that moment, then one or more of the hindrances are present. And usually the hindrances come together. I talk about it like when there's a fumble on the football field and all the players are jumping on top of each other trying to get to the ball. That's how the hindrances come. It's not just like one is there, it's one comes and the other comes and the other comes, and then before you know, we're just in this huge hindrance trap, right? So with regards to the hindrances, we don't want to we don't want to listen to the hindrances. We don't want to follow the hindrances. We don't want to identify with the hindrances. They're not who we are, who we really are. We don't want to say that's me, that's mine, that says something about me. These are the mistakes that we make with regards to the hindrances. So when I think about this teaching or this advice, to observe and recognize when a perception or feeling arises, where does it come from? One of the main things I'm asking is this coming from the energy, the birthing ground of one of the five hindrances? And this is very subtle. Something I want to point out before I forget is, have you ever noticed that when you're dealing with, it could be a physical ailment or a mental ailment, how the mind will check in and, like, let's say I've had this like really paralyzing anxiety for a couple days, and it's like, shit, it's back. What am I gonna do? And then let's say I'm like, I'm exercising or I'm washing the dishes, and I kind of forget about it. And then out of nowhere, then the mind will just be like, oh, is it still there? We'll kind of ask this question, is it still there? And the same could be true of some kind of physical pain, like a headache or something like that, right? Is it still there? Just kind of checking in. If that question of is it still there is coming from a feeling or if it's coming from fear, if it's coming from anxiety, it'll produce a certain anxiety. So when I say, I'm just trying to talk about how subtle this gets. Um, and I apologize if I'm kind of like spitting while I'm talking. I just went to the dentist and my mouth feels a little weird here. But anyway, that checking in, how do I feel? It's very similar to that thought of like, oh, how is this going to feel tomorrow? When it's coming from a place of fear or anxiety, it tends to give birth to more fear and anxiety. And I'll talk in a little bit, I'll talk about what we can do instead of asking that, instead of that checking in. So, I guess the inverse of that is when we're feeling really well. And for some of us, it's been a long time, and that's okay if that's the case. But you'll notice that when we're feeling clarity, wisdom, or joy, presence, mindfulness, samadhi, when we're doing really well, the thoughts, the the fabrications that arise when we're in those relatively peaceful, well, frames of reference or states of mind, the fabrications that arise from that, the feelings and thoughts that arise from that, are colored by that. And I think we can trust those things relatively more than the feelings and thoughts that arise from the hindrances. Um, so, in other words, what I'm advocating for, practically speaking, is that when a thought arises in the mind, rather than just following where it leads to and assuming that it's our own thought, we actually want to have this kind of pause to ask the question, where is this coming from? Is it coming from a place that I trust? If it's not, let's not follow it. This, if it's not, then this is something that is trying to deceive us, it's not to be trusted. It's kind of like when you're watching a TV show or a movie, and there's a character who is the bad guy, but he or she's going around deceiving other people, lying to people, and you, as a viewer, you're kind of like you're hoping that the um the characters, the main characters, the characters you like, are not going to be deceived. But in life, this happens in the mind. One thought that's coming to me is Sauron, the Dark Lord in Tolkien's universe, so like Lord of the Rings. He's known as Sauron the Deceiver. And um, in the Lord of the Rings movies, he's like this full-fledged bad guy, like very obviously like a negative kind of like demon sort of character. But um prior to that, he had uh made himself appear like an elf, like a positive being, right? And so he, in the stories, he's able to deceive the elves, the men, the dwarves, partially because it wasn't so obvious that he was evil. And that's what it's like in the story, the battleground of the heart, of the mind. When things arise, they can be so deceiving in terms of kind of who they are, their character. So a lot of people will pride themselves as being good judgments of character, but in their own minds, they are terrible judgments of character. And as I'm saying this, I'm just appreciating how radical and how subtle this teaching is. It's simple, and yet it's radical and subtle, and this is part of the genius of the Buddha. To think, to look inwards, to look into the heart, and to become skilled at this sensitivity. So it can start as this kind of analytical identification, okay, really thinking, contemplating, where is this perception coming from? But it develops into this kind of second nature intuition and sensitivity. We get better and better at realizing where things come from. And one way to think about this is um is this perception, feeling, or thought, is it coming from dukkha? So dukkha, of course, is this Pali word that is translated as suffering, dissatisfaction. And I really think that this is a quality of experience if we were to just think of things as either dukkha, suffering, or not suffering. It's a quality of experience that we can become very sensitive to. We can become attuned to it. In other words, we can get really good at just like, oh yeah, this is suffering. This is dissatisfaction. So that might be a quick, helpful kind of tactic if you're, I love talking about the five hindrances. I think it's a very basic, foundational kind of Buddhism 101 thing that is so practical, so helpful, so effective. But there are so many people that I teach or talk to that, for whatever reason, don't want to really spend a lot of time with that, which I think is a mistake. But if you want to try something that might be a little bit similar or simpler, instead of having to think about the five hindrances, is really think about dukkha in all of its different forms. And when a perception arises, is this coming from a place of dukkha? Okay. So then the other side of this, which is of course very related, is not where the perception is coming from, but where is it leading to? I think this is a very um wise, I think it's just such a cool uh consideration. You know, as Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche points out, he says something like thoughts are like waves endlessly coming. Since beginningless time, thoughts come. we're getting pounded by these waves. And then they leave. And they leave without residue, remainderlessly, they leave. So there's no logical reason for us to be enslaved by thinking. But this is our experience where we are so enslaved by thoughts. So with this aspect of considering where a perception, a thought, or feeling, or mood is leading to, in other words, when this wave comes, where is it going to push us out to? This can be really quite powerful, quite helpful, because we all care about how we are going to feel, what we're becoming, right? So when anxiety and depression arises, if you think about it, it doesn't arise as like this one thing. It comes with all kinds of different thoughts and stories and particularities, and it's coming in the present moment, and in we're going about our days, doing all the things that we do, attending to our obligations, going to work, going to school, whatever it is. And then this thought comes, and then this other thought comes in. So we're getting all these things are arising. So rather than getting swept up, if we every time a thought arises, every time we bring some mindfulness, some presence, and we just consider, where is this leading to? Um, this is it's identifying, does this lead to more suffering? Does this lead away from suffering? Does this take me to where I want to go? And here, so the Buddha, when you read suttas, when you read the Pali Canon, the Buddha is so I find just like strategic and sane. It's kind of like, all right, if I'm an athlete, right, or like let's say a football player or something, and I'm worried about getting injured, and a thought arises like, oh no, I might get injured at this game today. If we look into, okay, where is this leading to? This kind of worry? Is it leading to me not being able to perform, not being able to reach my goal of getting to the Super Bowl or whatever it is, right? That can really, okay, then we can understand this is not a way of thinking that is productive, that leads anywhere good. I don't want to go in that direction. Um, and we can kind of wisely consider, okay, if there's something I want to do about this, maybe I'm gonna learn about these injuries. A lot of these injuries are tendon related. How do I strengthen my tendons? I'm going to try different things I'm going to do certain protocols. That can be skillful, but the fear, the quality of fear, it's something we want to have a healthy respect of. We want to be able to identify it and really determine how much of it we want to, you know, we want around in our hearts. So where is a perception leading to? So I think the Buddha is really kind of an expert on causality and results. And you'll see in some suttas where he'll talk about, if you want a particular result, all you have to do is put in the causal condition that gives rise to that result. So rather than obsessing about the result or wondering how to get there, we just put in the causal condition. There's one sutta, I think it's called Chaitanya Sutta. I think there's several suttas by that name, but one of them, he talks about, um, for one who has developed virtue, sila, there is no need to have the wish, may I have non-regret, non-remorse. It's just natural for one who has virtue to have no regret, no remorse. And for one who has no regret, there's no need to wish, may I be glad, happy. It's just natural for one who doesn't have regret to have gladness and happiness. And that keeps going to piti, this quality of well-being, this kind of physical, energetic sense of joyfulness and upliftedness, rapture. And that leads on to samadhi and so forth, to knowing and seeing things as they've come to be, to release, to freedom, to nibbana. So we can kind of work our way back. Okay, if I want nibbana, if I want full awakening, full enlightenment, it starts with this quality of virtue. And there's different entryways. So in another sutta, the Buddha has the same kind of progression, except the starting point is the recollection of Dhamma. So remembering the Dharma, this wow, this amazing teaching that we are really uniquely blessed to have. That remembrance, that recollection is a starting point, and that leads to nibbana. In another sutta, he'll talk about how proximity to the Kalyanamitta, association and being close to, proximity to the Kalyanamitta, the beautiful friend, the wise, admirable friend, the Dharma friend, that is the starting point. So he's really kind of an expert on where things lead to. And this is a way of looking at things that I think is incredibly skillful. If we really consider, where does something lead to? If we follow this, where is this going to get me? Um, then we can, this might sound simple in the sense of, you might be like, yeah, of course, anxiety and depression is going to get me more anxiety and depression. Like, why do we need to think about this? Um, it, there's a lot more to it, I would say. Like, if we come into the present moment and we bring mindfulness to this moment here and now, you will see all kinds of things arise and go, arise and go. So what this practice is saying is, as things arise, we pay attention to, where is this coming from and where is it going? Is it skillful? Does it lead towards suffering? Is it coming from suffering? Does it lead to more suffering? Is it coming from the darkness? Is it coming from the light? Is it going towards the light? Is it going towards the darkness? And the Buddha had said something like, there are four kinds of beings: beings who are born in darkness and who are going towards darkness, beings who are born in darkness and going towards light, beings born in the light going towards the darkness, and beings born in the light going towards the light. So we want to one way of talking about this is, we want to be an active participant in the directionality of our hearts, in the directionality of our beings. Um, all of this is fabricated, concocted. Our experience of the present moment is being fabricated and put together in a number of different ways, with a number of different causal conditions. So this experience is due to a web of conditions that come together and appear or present themselves as our body and our hearts in this moment. And some of that is our past karma, but a lot of that is our present fabricating. So the Buddha talks about, there's bodily fabrications, there's verbal fabrications, and there's mental fabrications. And perhaps I'll get to this in another talk in more detail. But we can start to influence and kind of purposefully, with deliberation, fabricate in a direction of more peace, more happiness, all the way till we get to this point where we're going to, we're trying to realize nibbana. which is a whole nother thing um, that I'd like to talk about. But anyway, I know earlier I said I would talk about this thing that we do often when we're anxious or depressed, where we kind of ask this question: oh, how am I feeling? How am I feeling? Is it still there? Is the depression still there? We kind of check in with ourselves. We wake up, and sometimes it's like one of the first things we think: oh, is it still there? So if we realize that that questioning is coming from fear and leading to fear, right? But it's habitual, it keeps coming up. We can start to take a hold of this and kind of one thing we can do is instead of asking that question, no, just rather than how am I feeling, it's almost like I'm feeling confidence. I'm starting to feel my strength. I'm starting to gather my presence, my awareness. I'm coming back home. You can use whatever word you like, whether it's well being or happiness or peace or strength or power, gathering, collecting. So rather than asking the question, we're recognizing that it's not like we're checking in on something that's already there. So it's not just like we're either anxious or we're not, and we're asking the question to see if that anxiety is there. It's that we're actively participating in and fabricating our current experience. We're actively doing that. We're conceiving and perceiving, just like in a dream. We're building the dream and then we're living the dream, right? We're directing the movie and then we're acting in the movie. It's all happening together. So rather than asking that question, we're kind of actively leaning into the quality of trust, strength, confidence, sort of the opposite of anxiety. If it's depression, we're actively leaning into no, there's a lightheartedness, there's potential, there's an openness, there's a brightness. So you'll find the more you practice, the more you meditate, the more malleable experience becomes. And we can actually do this. The mind is the forerunner. Mind is the master. Mind is the maker. When the mind is happy, we experience happiness. When the mind is heavy, we experience heaviness. And we start to realize that actually the mind is so pliant, it's so pliable, it's flexible, constantly changing. Just because we were depressed yesterday doesn't mean that we need to be now. Just because we were anxious 1 second ago doesn't mean that we need to be anxious now. Um, that's why, like, one of the ways to deal with these emotions is to really just uplift ourselves. You can to remind ourselves we can do this. I can be well. I can be free. This is what it's all about. This is what the Buddha found. So after this, for your reflection, may all beings share in the blessings springing from this Dharma talk. By the power of these blessings, may all be well, happy, and free. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Godhan, Dhamman, Sanghan, Namasami.